Marriage in today's world. That's what we're talking about today with Chris and Gina Allers. And I would say this sounds like a bit of a loaded topic when we talk about what has changed with marriage. And every time I talk about my husband or complain about him, and then I see you guys, I'm like, oh, I should do better. But that's okay. It's all, you just said, it's all part of the stages of life and marriage. So today we're talking about some of the things that you guys cover in the Worldwide Marriage Encounter Retreats. And you had quite a list, and you said, oh my gosh, even on one of these topics, we could probably spend a whole hour. But I wanted to start with, because you gave me a couple of topics, the expectations of marriage. Is this something that you guys talk about? Where do you start?
Yeah, well, marriage in today's world is one of the presentation topics we cover over in our weekend retreats, and it's probably one of my favorites because it gives us the opportunity to walk through these stages with these couples and maybe do a little bit of a reality check on where they're at and where do all these preconceived notions come from, those expectations that get put on everybody, and they come from your own family history, maybe what you before you're married and your own expectations of what it's going to be like, and then you get together and you're in your romance stage and you're figuring out how to do everything together, and it's fun, right? But then a few years go by and maybe those qualities that you fell in love with when you first met your spouse start to annoy you a little bit.
Not as fun after a while.
Not as fun.
Not as funny after a while.
Yeah, right. That great advice that he would always give can sound annoying. So and now jobs, kids, things are starting to come into play, and you get to this stage of, maybe we call it disillusionment, where you kind of find a pattern, you fall into a pattern, and the influences of today's world, the society, and the expectations that people can put on it, with work, and just kind of start to cave in on you a little bit.
It's really easy to, when we get into that disillusionment, the analogy I kind of like to think of is quicksand. Not a lot of people have been in quicksand, but you can kind of visualize a lot of times the harder you fight, the deeper you go. And so there's a certain way that you get out, and in some cases you need help. You need to ask for help. And so we get into that moment, is this really what it's like? Is this as good as life is going to be? And so what we have found every time we've attended the weekend is we understand that maybe we aren't as good as we think we are. And how does that disillusionment, how do we pull back that curtain for ourselves?
How about, you said maybe we're not as good as we think we are. Maybe we're not as bad off as we think we are. Can you look at that as well when we talk about divorce rates being so high, and it's easy to be like, things are not good, the romance stage is over, I want out?
Yeah, that's why we call it disillusionment, is because you're in where you think you're okay. You really do. You're just kind of going through your daily pattern, and you're thinking you're all right, when actually the choices that you're making, the decisions that you're making probably aren't as good as they should be. And it's so easy for, when you're at that point in your relationship, for other outside influences to start to affect you. Like we're so plugged in right now with media and phones, TV, magazines, TV shows, everything is
Netflix.
Social media.
Social media is huge.
I mean, think about what you see on Facebook, any social media platform, right? I mean, you usually see the highlights that people have.
I love that, the highlight reel, you're right. It's easy to look at other relationships and think they have the perfect relationship. Look how great her husband is. Why isn't my husband that great?
Right, and so you don't always see the challenges that happen, right? That's a moment in time that you see of the 24 hours of that day or of that moment. And so it really gives us an opportunity. Yes, maybe things aren't as bad as we think they are, or, hey, we're better off than we think we are. We always find ourselves comparing against those that have more, right? We talked about the BMW and the Jaguar, and you kind of look at that and go, how could that person ever think that that's not good enough? And yet they live in a world and a perspective where it isn't. And so we all have our own perspectives from where we are.
And you already kind of mentioned making decisions. Making the decision to love is reaching joy in your marriage is something that you sent me.
Yeah, so how does the couple get out of a disillusionment phase? And there's a couple of things that they can do. So confronting for the sake of your relationship, bringing this up. If you find a pattern that you don't like, confront your spouse about it and work on it together. And then repeated decisions to love. And that can be anything from the smallest little bit of, hey, I kissed my spouse in the morning before I checked my phone, or anything like that. When you're asked to do
Great
something,
piece of advice.
make the decision together, right? It's the we choices, not the me choices that are filled with today. Everything's I and me, when really you need to, all those little decisions need to be the we choices.
We choices.
Some of the harder choices that I have to love Gina is like to be vulnerable, to open myself up and let her see something that maybe I'm not proud of, or mistakes I've made, or how I'm not living up to my own expectations. So you make those choices. They're not always the huggy, kissy, fun choices. Sometimes it's sacrifice.
Right, allow yourself, right, make decisions to love, but also allow yourself to be loved as well. So
Have to wrap it up on that. That's great. Thank you. Always great to have you guys here and very inspiring. Stay with us. Coming up next here on North Dakota Today, how you can support our local veterans and enjoy a great night at the ballpark.